Alright, it's Barry, and today I'm going to show you everything you need to care for your tomato plants. Summer is finally here, which means it's time to start caring for tomato plants and keeping them in check. I'm going to go through all of those tomato maintenance tasks that need doing as we make our way through the summer and all the way through the growing season to get the absolute most out of our tomato plants this year. We're going to be looking at planting, staking, pruning, cloning, pollinating, Megablooms, feeding, and even my hydroponic tomatoes. If you have any tomato tips that I missed today, let me know in the comments, because there's loads and loads of different ideas and methods all around the world, so it'd be really great to hear those. And if this video's helped you or if you've enjoyed it, do please consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really helped my channel out at the moment, as my videos seem to be getting recommended to all the wrong parts of YouTube, and it takes absolutely ages before it works out who it's supposed to be showing them to, and by then it's too late and it's the end of the year. So with all that out the way, let's go and have a look at planting. So we're starting off in the greenhouse today, and these are what I like to call my main tomatoes. These are the ones that I always feel like they do the best out of all of my tomato plants in this bed. So if you checked out my videos a couple of weeks back, well, it was actually really earlier on in the year, I did a video about direct sowing. So I was looking at marigolds, calendula, things like that you can plant with tomatoes, or that you can sow with your tomatoes to give them the best start. These tomato plants weren't in there at that time. The bed was completely empty, and I sowed in all of these lovely flowers. So we've got marigolds growing down there, and they are a bit dense. You know, I didn't thin them out as they were growing, mainly just because I didn't have time. So I mean, look, these are absolutely enormous marigold plants. They're just not far off now, and look, there's another one. These calendulas, absolutely gorgeous. I mean, these ones are absolutely beautiful. These have flowered within the last sort of week or so, and they're doing absolutely great. Yeah, really made up with those. And on that note, I'm just going to go over quickly the two different main types of tomato plants. These are all what we call indeterminate plants. So they're more of a vine tomato. They'll grow tall. Obviously, you've got to stake them in. I'm going to go over all that in a minute. So indeterminate plants, they'll produce fruit. They'll flower all the way through the season. They'll keep producing fruit, and they'll go all the way to the end, keep making tomatoes until it's time for the plant to come out, once it gets too weak and it's just completely had it by the end of the season when it starts getting colder. So they'll keep going all the way through summer and give you absolutely loads of tomatoes all the way until autumn time. And then we have determinate tomatoes like cherry falls. I'm going to show you those in a minute. Determinate tomatoes produce all of the fruit at once. They're more of a bushy tomato, so they don't grow into a vine, they grow more like a bush. They're good for like patio pots, raised beds, hanging baskets, that sort of thing. And determinate tomatoes, as I say, they'll produce all of that fruit in one big go. So you'll get a big punnet of cherry tomatoes, for example, and they'll be absolutely amazing to go with all your summer salads. And you know, they'll be absolutely great once they come through. So I'm really excited about those as well. And like I'm gonna say this again in a bit, but I don't know what's what here. I don't know what tomatoes are what. I labelled them all wrong earlier on, and honestly I haven't got a clue. So they're all going to be a surprise once they start producing those tomatoes, and I can figure out which ones they are. Let's have a look. I'm fairly sure we've got tomatoes growing here somewhere. Oh, there we go. I mean, that one's pretty big already. I don't know whether it's a hazard a guess now that that's a beef tomato. I'm not entirely sure. But we'll see, we'll see. So yeah, that's a brief overview of determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. So it's a case of just picking whichever it is that most suits your growing space for a start. Your indeterminate tomatoes, great for grow bags, going in your beds, going in big planters and things if you've got that vertical space where you can grow upwards, and that isn't going to be a problem. And then you've got your determinate tomatoes if you've got a patio or a pot or a smaller raised bed maybe that you want to grow in, even a hanging basket, because the smaller, the more manageable, and they don't require as much maintenance as these indeterminate varieties that you're going to have to look after all the way through summer, and you're going to have to prune them. stake them, all that business. You don't have to do that with your determinate varieties because they're happy to just grow as they are into a big bush of tomatoes. So, yeah, let's go over to the polytunnel and have a look at those jobs that we can be getting on with. And just on that note, I've just spotted these. Oh, there's a leaf in the way. They are definitely San Marzano Italian tomatoes. Absolutely beautiful tomatoes, so I'm really happy to see those growing. So at least I know which one of these plants is, and maybe two. So I'm in the polytunnel, and the first thing that I'm going to do today is give these tomato plants a pruning because they're long overdue. It seems like no matter how often you do this, they always seem to be growing more and more side shoots, and they've gone absolutely crazy. And yeah, at the point that they're at the moment, it's as if they've grown entire new tomato plants. So they're going to take a good pruning. So that's perfectly ideal for this video because I can show you exactly what they get like within maybe a week or two. I think it's actually 2 weeks since I last did this. So yeah, they've gone fairly crazy in the meantime. So let's have a look at those, get them pruned. Right, here we go, and I can't even remember what kind of tomato plant this is. I've got a tag somewhere. A gardener's delight, apparently. Now, I say apparently because it seems like when I've sown these, I didn't have anything to mark them up. I didn't have any labels or pens or anything, so I thought I'll just remember what they are and I'll do it tomorrow. And then when tomorrow came, it seems like I've labelled them up wrong. So the majority of my tomato plants aren't what I thought they were, and they all seem to be mixed up. But on that note, it is a nice surprise once they start actually producing fruit, because obviously I'm going to know what they are then. And this one, like I say, this one's gone absolutely berserk. And see, we've got some nice flowers there as well. So I'll try and work out where the original stem is. You can see there where it's been tied up to the stake. I'll go over that in 1 second. You can see just here. So normally you'll get your side shoots, also called suckers sometimes. They grow just on your nodes. But when you get from your main stem, you'll get a leaf growing off, or a load of leaves, a leaf stem, and they'll grow just in between that little elbow there, that node between your main stem and your leaf. So normally when they're small, you can just snap them off like that. And if you go around doing that every day, you know, it saves you a really good, you know, a good chunk of time before they get to this sort of stage and end up with absolutely loads of them as well. And they just come off, just twist them, pinch them, whatever. But if they get a bit longer, they'll grow like this one, which is almost indistinguishable from the main stem. This one's absolutely enormous, and it's even started to get some flowers just there at the top, and you can see just exactly the same. It's growing between that node between the main stem and the leaf there. And for this one, I'm just going to use my secateurs and cut that off just like that. Oh, that's fell down the back somewhere. There we go. And now this, you can use this to make a clone of this tomato plant. All you've got to do, that bottom there, stick it in a nice pot of soil, compost. You don't even have to use hormone gel on it. You could maybe use like a root powder or a root hormone gel just to speed it up. But if you just plant that in some compost, it's going to grow new roots out the bottom, and that'll make it an entire brand new tomato plant. So I'm going to do that in a minute with this one. I have got some in the greenhouse that I did already ahead of time, just to show you how that goes, and how the, you know, what they look like after a couple of weeks and everything. But one thing to just be aware of when you do this, you put them in your soil and water them, and no matter how often you water them, this is going to wilt. It's going to look dead, and as long as that stem is there in the middle, is perfectly fine and green, it's going to come back. It'll bounce back, and they'll wilt every day for absolutely ages. They'll look like they're dead, but if you keep watering them, keep them going, they will grow roots, and then they'll absorb all that water eventually and start looking like a normal tomato plant, just like it was there now. If it was sat in a pot, it'll come back to look like that. So we'll show you those in a minute, and we'll plant this one as well because that's quite a big one. Right, and normally you'll see that you get them just here at the bottom. There's absolutely loads down there. It's quite hard to get down here with this tripod. Let's go around this way. Wires hanging off. Yeah, see, they're all growing out around the bottom. That's one. So I'm going to cut all of these off. Oh, what's that there? Horsetail. This bed is well overdue a weeding as well. It's starting to get a bit out of hand. See, just there we go. You can see them at the bottom now. We've got stems coming off everywhere. And yeah, you just got to keep cutting them. And they're absolutely... See, there's one. So I'll give this plant a nice tidy up now. And then we'll move on to the next part. And there we go. I have now cut all of this off that one plant. These are all the same thing, all just side stems that have come off that plant. And you could plant every single one of these and you'd have like what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tomato plants just off that one tomato plant, and they'd be up and growing in no time. It'd be a lot quicker than starting them from fresh anyway. And then if you look at this plant now, it looks a lot less dense, less bushy, and that means that it's going to start concentrating more energy into the stuff that it's got left remaining. So flowers, fruit, and it's going to start producing more on this one main stem. So now that you can see that it is leaning, so it is time to get this one staked up a bit more. But I always make sure that I give them a good watering after I've done this, just to make sure that all that extra evaporation that's going to be happening out of those little wounds where you've cut it off, they're going to have plenty of water to sort of replace that with, because they will lose a bit of moisture through those cuts. So I like to use these little clip things, super quick. You can reuse them loads for years and years. I always try and pick more up when they've got them every year in the shop. I think these are from Lidl maybe, but yeah, they're really good. And I prefer using these to like wire, because wire gets a bit fiddly and it's hard to sort of reuse. I like using the jute string as well, but it doesn't last as long and it starts rotting when it gets wet and stuff. So sometimes for like longer lived plants, it's not really as good. But yeah, so basically you can see that this one's attached here, starting to grow away again now that it's had all that extra weight removed. It's a bit stronger in this sense, but just on the main stem, clip it to your cane, and that'll keep it growing up nice and straight. And you want to get these canes in maybe when they're a foot tall. You'll normally know because they'll start leaning, but it helps just to get them in once they're a foot tall and they've started growing some nice leaves and things. It is time to get those stakes in and make sure that they aren't falling over, because it just makes them a bit easier to look after as well. And there we go. Now that that plant is all done, nicely pruned and standing up straight with that cane, it is time to give it a good watering. So as far as watering goes with tomato plants, you want to make sure that you are... look at that, I've missed one. There's one there, just a sec. Oh, that's typical. There we go, easy as that. So yeah, when we're watering our tomato plants, we want to make sure that we're aiming that water at the base of the plant, straight at the soil where it needs it the most, because we don't want to be adding too much water onto these leaves. One, because they bead up. When the water beads up on there, it's working like a little magnifying glass, and that sunlight's getting amplified into the leaf and getting all that UV amplified, which is going to damage any cells like chlorophyll and things inside there if they get too hot. So you don't want to do that and cook the leaves, because it's going to make the plant less efficient at using that light. It's really important to make sure that you get that water at the base. But on that note as well, as we get later into the season, you're going to start seeing things like blight, which needs water. It needs the water of the leaves to actually get into the leaves. So I've got a video all about blight and everything you need to know about blight. So when that starts turning up, do check out that video, because it'll explain everything about not getting plants wet and how it travels around on the wind and things like that. So yeah, just generally speaking, it's best to keep your leaves dry. So you want to be aiming all that water at the base. But the one exception to that is foliar feeding. So when you're doing it on purpose, it's fine. So if you're going to use like a seaweed fertilizer, I've got a load in here. So this is a seaweed fertilizer, and you're just spraying that on your leaves all over, and that'll get absorbed into there and give them a nice nitrogen boost. So there we go, that is nicely sprayed. That seaweed is going to give it a really nice nitrogen boost and get right into that plant. one thing that we want with a plant of this age is to give it loads and loads of nitrogen. So on that note, you don't want to use tomato food on a plant that is this size. I mean, it's just starting to get flowers now. So once they start setting fruit, then it is time to start moving on to tomato food as part of your feeding plan. But at this point, when you're just growing your plant, it needs all loads of nitrogen to be able to produce all of this green growth. So tomato food has a lower nitrogen content, but more potassium and phosphorus, which is ideal for growing fruit. So you want that for when you're growing your tomatoes and your flowers, but it's not necessarily as good when you want loads of green growth like your leaves, which is what the plant needs at this stage because it's growing. It needs to produce energy, it needs to produce its roots. So it wants that nitrogen to be able to produce all those leaves and loads of nice greenery to make the most of the sunlight that it's getting. So while it's at this sort of stage, before it starts setting fruit, use an all-purpose fertilizer, sort of like your Miracle Grow, something like that. Have a look on the actual box or the packaging or the bottle or whatever it is. You want to get one with an NPK ratio. They're normally on there, you'll see it as an NPK ratio or you'll see it as 3 numbers. The first one's usually nitrogen, and you want to see that either equal or more than the phosphorus and potassium, because that is what the plant is needing right now at this stage. So on that note, I've been feeding these today. I've gone through all of the allotment basically with a fertilizer called Grow. It's a 777 fertilizer, so everything's equal, in equal ratio. Your nitrogen, potassium and phosphorus is all there, and everything that the plant needs at this stage. So it is starting to develop its flowers, as you can see. So that phosphorus and potassium is there for it, but it's also getting enough nitrogen to be able to grow all your stems and leaves, which is the perfect combination. So yeah, that's my recommendation at this point of the year, and then move on to your tomato fertilizers as you start getting those flowers growing, the fruit growing. When they really start getting into that fruit production and less about the growing, once they reach the maximum height, that is when you want to be starting to use that tomato food. So on that note, one thing that I need to do, another tip, where is it? Cutters. Once you've finished on your first plant, give these a clean. You don't want to be moving between plants, just like you wouldn't move between a person if you was using some kind of surgical implements. You wouldn't want to use the same things on, what's going on there? You wouldn't want to use the same things on multiple people, and it's the same for your plants. You don't want to be spreading any disease or fungus between one plant and the next. So I'll give these a clean. I just use a normal, like something like this, a multi-purpose cleaner with bleach or something along those lines, which will kill any bacteria or viruses that are on there between plants. I don't know what's going on with that. There we go. So yeah, that is plant done. And then I'll move up to the next one just to show you some other bits and pieces. And after all of those plants are pruned, this is how much I've cut off. I mean, look at that, there's absolutely loads. So if you're short of tomato plants, there's definitely a lot there. And I definitely am not short of tomato plants. But yeah, yeah, there's absolutely loads there. So, looking at these now, they're just ready for staking up, really. We've just done this one, and as you can see, these are just leaning away. It just happens when you get these side shoots growing, it tends to fork out, but as soon as this gets staked back up, it'll just correct itself anyway and start growing back up right again. But up to now, I'm really pleased. I'm glad to see some flowers forming, because that means we're going to have some nice tomatoes relatively quickly. And we've got the Megabloom, that's right there. But yeah, that's the one we've just planted down there, which was from the side shoot. Yeah, I'm really pleased with how these are going up to now. Plenty of jobs to be getting on with. And they're gonna, I'm sure, make loads of tomatoes all the way through the year. Right, and here we go. We're at the back now, just behind the plant that we've just been pruning up. And it's right between my 2 red sorrel plants. And I've just dug a small hole here because I'm going to be planting in one of these ones, which is one of the cuttings that I mentioned earlier on. So this was a side shoot of one of the tomato plants in my greenhouse. I don't know what variety it was, so it's going to be a bit of a surprise when this actually starts producing fruit to see what kind of tomato plant we've actually got here. And as I mentioned, this was literally just a side cutting I've put it into some cocoa fibre there with a bit of, I think it's perlite, not vermiculite, it's perlite, just mixed in just for a bit of aeration, I suppose. And I have not, this is literally the first one of these that I've unpotted for planting, so, oh yeah, there we go, look at those roots. And when you consider this plant had no roots whatsoever, and it was just a side cutting, that is a clone of that other plant. And, you know, it's a free tomato plant that would have otherwise gone on the compost heap. Oh, I always drop everything. So, that's a really nice root ball, actually. And this was maybe, it was last time I did it, so what did I say earlier on? It was like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, I don't know. It wasn't very long ago. And for the majority of that time, it looked like it was dead. It was totally wilted because it obviously didn't have those roots to get all of the water that it needed to support those leaves. But they do grow them really, really quickly. Those roots come through in no time at all. There we go. And that is an entire new tomato plant just from one of those side cuttings. And the amount of money you can save by doing that, just by planting out more and more tomatoes as the season goes on. Because even just looking at that, that is bigger than a tomato plant that you'd get in the garden centre for what, £2-3, I don't know. It's bigger than one of those, and it was totally free. So definitely, I mean, it was only a small pot, so you can fit loads in as well. And, you know, save yourself some money and do some of those. And I'll just do one now. So the one that we cut off before that really big stem, I mean, look, it's starting to wilt already because it's so hot today as well. That really doesn't help. But this has started to really, really go droopy. You've got your end of your stem there that we cut off. Just going to poke it right down in the middle of there. And that's it. I'm going to have to give this really good water. In fact, I think I'm going to have to stand this in some water because this compost has dried out because it's so hot. So I'll get that stood in some water, and in a couple of weeks' time, this will be ready to plant out. I mean, to be honest, it's probably going to carry on flowering. They normally do when I do this, but yeah, in a couple of weeks' time, that's going to be an entire, reasonably sized tomato plant ready to plant out. And as I was saying earlier, this is what your cuttings end up looking like. They look really shriveled, really sad, really unhappy because they don't have any roots to suck up that water. So it does take them quite a couple of days, even weeks, before they start to bounce back and look like tomato plants again. But just keep watering them, be persistent, be patient, and they will carry on growing once they get those roots in place and they can start absorbing enough water again. Because the main thing for the plant is to keep that stem healthy and make sure that it still has all of that sort of vascular system to take all of the water and nutrients around the plant. So the leaves will take a bit of a backseat at first while it keeps that central nervous system in place. I shouldn't really say central nervous system, but you know what I mean, just as an example. But yeah, there we go. And the next job is making sure that all of these plants and flowers are pollinated. And as you can see, I've come in the polytunnel in the raised bed because these are my cherry falls tomatoes. Always recommend these for doing in raised beds, hanging baskets, anything like that. And these are absolutely enormous at the moment. I mean, you can see they've really bushed out loads since I put them in here. These are a determinate variety, so these don't need pruning. There we go. I mean, look, I mean, I've got some tomatoes growing on there already. Can you see those? There's one. But I mean, look how many flowers are on these. I mean, determinate plants tend to flower all in one go. They produce loads and loads of flowers, produce all of the fruit at once. And these are going to be absolutely covered in amazing cherry tomatoes in the next couple of weeks. So all we need to do, I mean, look, they're all underneath and everything. I'm really pleased with these. All we need to do is give the plant a bit of a shake. I think, I can't even remember, is this like 2 or 3 plants? But I mean, it was like, what, 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago this weekend that these went in when I made this raised bed. I mean, look at all these plants, they're absolutely enormous. These are the biggest nasturtium leaves I think I've ever seen. But everything is super happy in here. In fact, to the point of overcrowding. I'm gonna have to actually prune these leaves a bit because they're starting to overtake everything. I wasn't expecting these nasturtiums to get quite so big. But tomato plants is what we're looking at today. And all we need to do is give the plant a good shake, and that tomato plants are perfectly happy to self-pollinate just as long as you give them a bit of a shake. The wind will do it, or I mean the flies will do it in here anyway, because the front of the polytunnel's open and there's plenty of flies in here to make sure that it's pollinated. But by giving them a tap or a shake, which is what I have to do with my hydroponic ones where the flies can't get to them and the wind can't get to them, it's just basically knocking that pollen inside the flower onto the stamen and making sure that they do get pollinated. So it's just a small job, and to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if he was just fine without doing it, but it's one of those things. It takes like a second, and if it does it, then it does a good job. And I'd be really sad if I didn't do it. I didn't end up with tomatoes, so I'm not willing to take that risk. Maybe next year's tomato experiment, maybe I'll do that. I don't know. We'll see. That's one for next year, but these are doing absolutely brilliantly. So again, keep up to date with all my updates and everything, just to make sure that you don't miss on how these plants are getting, because I'm really excited to see how these go. Just as a bit of an update, here's my hydroponic tomatoes. They've had a bit of a move this week, but they're doing absolutely brilliantly, to be honest. They're flowering absolutely loads. These are the Cherry Falls variety, the same as I say in the hanging baskets, and the same ones that I've used in my raised bed. Let's have a look, when were these sown? So I sowed these 24th of April, put them into this system on the 2nd of May, so they haven't even been in here a month, and they're absolutely enormous. Another good thing with Cherry Falls is they don't need pruning, they don't need any of these side stems or anything taken off. They're perfectly fine to just bush out like they are doing, and they'll grow absolutely amazingly. And just like their outdoor counterparts, just giving the flowers a bit of a shake, give the plants a shake, and that'll make sure that they're nicely pollinated. They don't need flies, so they're perfectly good growing here indoors. They don't need pollinators, I should say, to travel around the flowers pollinating them, because that bit of a shake, they will self-pollinate. They've got everything they need in each flower to do that, so that's absolutely brilliant. And then just got some nice Beth Alpha flowers growing at the back there. Those miniature cucumbers, they're doing brilliantly as well. But I'll do updates on all those in my normal big updates. But yeah, these are doing absolutely brilliant. I mean, that's two plants in there, absolutely enormous. Doing absolutely, there's more flowers coming there, so they're doing a big flush of flowers now, and then I think that's it. They're determined as far as I know, so they are just going to do this one big flush of flowers, grow all those tomatoes, and then hopefully in a couple of weeks they'll be growing, and I can show you another update on those and see how they're getting on. And actually, just as a point, I have got one of them that I had left over, and it's just growing on its own in a grow tray. I've got stuffed a bit of jute just in the bottom there, just to give it a bit of support in that cell. And that is the exact same stuff, just hydroponic nutrient solution just in the bottom there. It's not getting oxygenated, so it's not growing as big or as well as the other versions that in the this cucumber grabbing onto everything. It's not doing as well as the main ones in the big system, but it does have tomatoes growing on it, still flowering. But I do have this one tomato that's growing on there, so that just goes to show, even if you've just got one of these small grow trays, like a normal propagator tray, a bit of nutrient solution and water in the bottom, you can still grow hydroponic stuff anywhere. This has never seen soil in its life, and there you go, it's got fruit on it. This is a beef tomato now, I believe. It says that it's a money maker. I've got a money maker tag there down there at the bottom, and this is definitely one of the ones that I've labelled up wrong, because I am fairly sure this is a beef tomato, and it's for this reason. This, I've never seen one of these in real life, but this is a Megabloom, and I don't know how rare they are, but it's definitely something I've never seen one. You can see just inside there. And what this is, it's multiple flowers that have fused into one. I don't know how many's there. I mean, it just looks like one enormous flower. But it can be 6, it can be up to like 8 or something. But yeah, basically what's happened there's multiple tomato ovaries, flower ovaries, that have all fused together to produce this one enormous flower. Just lower down here, I've got still relatively big flower, but that looks like a normal flower. And these megablooms happen usually on beef tomatoes for a start, but they're usually caused by the plant been exposed to too much cold earlier in its life, and that causes some alterations in its genetic code, which make it prone to producing these massive fused flowers. It's basically a genetic deformity in the flower, and it usually resolves itself after the first couple of flowers. Like I say, I've only got the one here. That one I'm not sure about. These look relatively normal up to now. There's a scientific paper, I'll leave a link to that in the description as well, so you can check that out. But yeah, they generally tend to sort themselves out fairly early on, and that becomes less of a problem. But yeah, these did get exposed to a bit of cold earlier on as they was getting moved over to here from where I initially started them. And I'm wondering whether that is what has done this. I've never seen it before, and these did get cold, and they don't normally get cold because we had a fairly late cold spell, and I think that's probably what's caused it. I am just going to leave it to grow. I normally wouldn't. I'd cut that off because I don't think the fruit's going to be any good for it. It's going to be deformed, probably not going to grow properly. But you know what, I'm going to leave it just to see how it looks, and I'm sure there's going to be a few of you out there that will be interested to see how that turns out as well. So I'll leave that on there. We'll let it grow and see how it turns out. Well, there we go, that's all we've got time for today. Hopefully there's loads of jobs there that you can be getting on with all the way through summer to get the most out of those tomato plants and keep them nice and healthy and growing loads and loads of fruit. Don't forget to let me know in the comments about any different feeding regimens that you've got, any different things that you do to your tomatoes to look after them, because it is really interesting to see all those things that get passed down through gardeners and generations and things like that. And I've probably missed some stuff off as well, so it would be really interesting to see what you've got to say as far as how you look after your tomatoes. And as I mentioned as well, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to make sure that my videos are going to the right people who are actually interested in gardening, because that'd really help my channel if that was the case. But in the meantime, do keep those tomatoes looking nice and green, give them a nice feed, get them cut down so that they're growing really nice and pruned up those stakes and all of those other bits and pieces that we've just covered in the video. I'll see you next time.